what we're going to be going over is the Hpms user interface. We're going to be looking at it from the section-based mode, but I'll talk about where the difference is here in a second. So under data operations, annual Hpms is where we'll be spending all of our time today. Just to give you a little context, I've already run the Hpms process for 2018, and so you're going to see numbers in here. I've messed with those numbers, so probably the very last thing we'll do when we're done today is rerun it so that it overwrites the things that I've been playing with just to make sure everything's looking okay. All right, so when you run it, the interface has a couple different sections. So I'm going to go over 3 different sections of the UI. There's this top summary section, then there's the list of sites and statistics down here, and then at the bottom are some actions that you can do. In addition to these 3 sections, the interface has 2 different modes. It has a summary mode, which is what we're looking at right now, and then it has a detail mode when you're actually looking at each individual statistic. So I mentioned I already ran Hpms for 2018, and you can see some quality control error information over here on the right. And this is the set of QC that the Hpms software does on traffic data. The Hpms software that your Hpms coordinator uses has a zillion different QC. Most of them are not traffic data related. So this subset of those QC that actually would pertain to us. And so I'm not sure how the back and forth usually goes between you and your coordinator, but if it's the case where she would do this and run it and say, hey, why do we have 2,000 sites with a bad K factor? Hopefully you can short circuit that back and forth and just fix them here before it ever gets there. Okay, and then and we had something similar in Tratus, but it was an SQL, and we ran it, and then we gave you a spreadsheet with the results. This is dynamic. You can actually fix it within the user interface and immediately see the results change. And so we'll go over that in a second. This gives you if you're in a detail mode, let me do that. So let me just go to K factor. If you're looking at an individual statistic, this part over here tells you how the statistics were created. So in this case, for K factors, you have 375 K factors that were created using actual count data. You have 6,600 that were generated using just a factor group average, and then 1,700 are blank, for a total of 8,700 total sites. Okay. So this gives you a breakdown of how statistics were created, and we're going to talk a little bit more in a second about what each of these different types are and how you can customize it to do different things. And go back to summary view. So you can't really do, the only things you can do in this UI in this top part are up here. You can of course change the year. Go back to 2017. And you'll see these numbers change. I've run 2016, 17, and 18 in here just to have some context, and also, like when we talked yesterday, I wanted to compare the 2016 Hpms in Jackalope with the 2016 Hpms in Tratus, and that went pretty well. Okay. So you can change the year, you can change what you've already seen, you can change looking at the summary view or the detail view. You can actually run the Hpms process. When you click that button, which I just did, you get a dialog box that comes up basically saying we're going to run everything, and everything is going to be blown away unless you want to preserve your plug statistics. And I'll talk about what the plug statistics are in a second. So you can go over and you can spend a lot of time, kind of getting statistics looking the way you want to, and we'll call all of those plugs. If you wanted to rerun Hpms to, for example, get new data incorporated, so let's say you ran phase 5 Hpms and you realize, oh crap, we have this whole county missing. You could go back, rerun that county's worth of short-term counts, and then rerun Hpms, but you might not want your plugs to go away. If you do that, you would check those buttons, check those checkboxes if you wanted to keep your plugs around.
Okay.
And then you hit OK, but we're not going to do this until the very end because it takes a few minutes, and I don't want to sit here watching.
Okay.
Right. You can also see the log from when the last HPMS run occurred. So I ran it this morning. So this is the last time it ran for 2018. If you went back to 2017, you'd see the 2017 log. So you can see I ran it today, this morning. I was doing some testing just to make sure everything still looked okay. You could pretty much ignore everything in this log. In theory, if something bad happened, you'd see a big all caps error with an exclamation point somewhere in here. But in general, you can pretty much ignore this log except to note that HPMS process is finished, which is always, unless an error happens, the last line will always be something like this: finished running HPMS process, and then it'll tell you how long it took, and it took a couple minutes. And I mean, there's not much else you should really pay attention to in here. It's information for us. Like if we know a step is taking forever, we can go in and debug and try to figure out why and stuff like that. And we'll see this when we run it again, after we're done with the demo. But the log will be rewritten. It'll be deleted completely and rewritten when you run HPMS again. So let's go down to the detail section now. So for you, this is not true for everybody, but since we have traffic sections integration in Wyoming, you have more stuff here than other people do. So right now we're looking at all routes, and so this looks actually the same as what it would look for anybody running this. But you could go to a specific route like ML10. And when you go to a specific route, things change a little bit. All of a sudden, sorry, that wasn't sorted correctly. All of a sudden, you have milepoint information here. Which is important. Come on. Let me go back to all routes. Let me go back to all routes just for this, so because we have more data to look at. And so you'd be able to sort by beginning, and if you have long routes, whatever, you could filter. You could do the filter stuff like you can do anywhere else. So you can do that by route. So all your routes are here. All your site groups, if you also had site groups and you just wanted to isolate a particular site group to look at, you could do that there. Probably, in addition, for you, route's super important. But the other thing you could look at is you can look at this by QC. So, we have 3,300 sites that didn't have an ADT. We have 1,800 sites where the K factor was out of range. If you wanted to, that's why there were so few route things there. I had it filtered because I was playing with it this morning. So we are only looking at sites with a missing ADT. So this is all sites. So we'll have the 8,700 sites total, right?
Yep.
And if we click this, all of a sudden it'll be filtered. So it was filtered by missing ADT before. I didn't notice that. If we wanted to, for example, look at sites where the K factor was out of range, we just do that. And we would see all the sites with K factors out of range. You can tell when a statistic has an error because it'll have a red box around it. So any box you see in this thing with a red outline will have failed, will be included in some of these things. A particular site can have more than one error. So if you added up all these errors, you might get a number greater than the number of sites, which, that's fine. I mean, you can see that right here. So right. This 141E had both an ADT that was null and has a K factor out of range. If you hover over that number, it tells you what QC it failed. And it could potentially fail more than one QC, and you'd see both of them here. It's like your dir factor. should be less than 70 for a two-way road. That's one of the QC, and that one's 93. All right, so so this is where you can see everything. If you wanted to override a particular statistic here, you could do that. Any of these things to the right of this count type, any of these things here, plugged. So if you wanted to change that to a different number, you could do that. Change it to a 10. And then that would then be okay. I don't remember where I was. Does anybody remember where I should actually pick a side and do this? 00141E. So we don't have to rely on my memory. Double click the K factor, change that to 10. Oh, that's why.
Oh yeah, no kidding. Exactly.
So it was
it's working then.
So you have to, that was confusing. So anyway, you know what happened there. So anyway, if we go back to that site, which I've now forgotten, 00141E right there. So now it'll have a 10 and it won't be aired. And the other thing is you now see it's blue. That means you've plugged that. And if we were to go and rerun HPMS and you decided not to overwrite your plugs, that would stay 10. All right. I swear I know how to use this interface.
You're doing fine to me.
Okay, so that was the other one. There are the two 10s that I did, and I forgot this one. All right. So that's, I'm trying to think, what else is there on this screen? The other thing, of course, you can do all the filtering things, you can do all the paging things, you can export to the various formats like you can on any of our grids. Yeah, I think I'm going to leave. I think I'll probably go back because there might be some things back on the summary screen, but I think that's the majority here. I will go into these options. I'm going to go into the options last.
Okay.
I will just say these two buttons are important. So the generate export generates your HPMS stats file, which is identical in format with a couple exceptions to what you had before. What happens if I open? Ugh. All right, it's a CSV, which would look really nice in Excel. Let me see. Well, the only difference, we're just going to have to pretend. You could, if you did this on your local machine, I'm actually dialed into your server, and we don't have any Excel or Word or anything like that on your server there.
Okay.
If you were to do this, this would open in Excel. The only thing that's different is the HPMS metadata, which most HPMS coordinators ask you about, is at the very top. So
perfect.
Like the AADT_24, so there are 22,000 of those. The AADT 48, there's 811 of those. So that's the only difference. Otherwise, this will look exactly like your existing HPMS stats. And there's nothing pretty, that's all you can do. That's the button just generates HPMS stats. And obviously, if you make changes, the HPMS stats will change as well. I guess we'll go into group averages now too. Actually, no, we're going to do that in a second. Sorry. We're going to go into detail next. Okay, so this was the summary view, which is essentially your HPMS stats, but in something you can edit. Let's just go look at a particular factor. So let's go back and let's go look at your K factors as an example. So all the K factors that erred. So I just clicked that. And now we're only seeing K factors that are bad. And you see some pretty funky K factors here. And you might go, how, like for example, this site, 00155. I mean, how can you even create a K factor without, oh wait, I was looking at the wrong one. I thought that was this one here, 151. How can you create a K factor of 33 when there's no ADT? So you might wonder how the heck that even got created, much less why it was off. How you do that is you actually drill down to each statistic. And you can do that by going up here and going out of the summary view and into the detail view. And here we have here's how you can figure out how that statistic was created. So I'm just going to go, was it 151?
155, I think, Joe.
Otherwise, I will be continually screwing this up. Okay, so this is the one row. Let me just explain what you see here. So of course you have, actually, if you're in routes, you'll see the beginning route first. I don't know what route this is on, and I don't want to lose my site, so I'm not going to do that. But we'll do that after, just so you can see. You'll have the beginning mile point, you'll have the site, you'll have the ADT, and then everything after this is somehow involved in the creation of this statistic. So first of all, you have the final statistic, and this is the statistic that will actually show up in the grid on the summary page. You have last year's statistics. So last year it was 25, which is also out of range, by the way.
Yes.
2017, which is last year, I didn't actually do any checking. I just ran it and then realized I ran the wrong year. So who knows what's in there? I'm sure it doesn't match what was in your actual HPMS. So this 25 is probably incorrect in terms of what you actually ran last year.
Right.
You might want to load that in so you have an actual baseline that you can compare to. It tells you what the percent change was from last year's final statistic. If you had plugged a value, that value would show up here. This group means that a group average was created, and that was 33. And you can actually see that's the number that was used for the final. So it's the group average being off, which caused our final statistic to be off. The other way you can calculate a statistic is through a route average, and I'll explain that in a second. But if you had a route outlined, you could have all the sites on that route create a different average than what the group average was, and then that number could be used as the final. If a count had been taken at this site, that count number would have been the final number, and this is where it'd say continuous or short term. Parent, we're going to pretty much ignore. Some people use a scenario where, especially for class data, they'll have one like class site that contributes their data to a whole bunch of other sites.
Okay.
And we call those parent-child relationships. That's not something you have in your existing HPMS, but if you had that relation set up and this site actually happened to be a child of some other of a parent, the parent's number would show up here, and that would also potentially be your final statistic. So now I'm going to go into options, and I'm going to re-explain what I just did and show you how that's done, because this is something that's totally configurable. What you want to do is you want to hit that HPMS, run HPMS button at the top and not have to think about all this stuff, but I'm going to just show it just so you can see. So under options, there's this button called HPMS precedence, which I just clicked. And this tells you how the system is going to come up with what the final number is. So that number that's on the left, the official number that's going to go to your coordinator. So by default, we're looking at our default rule set here. It's going to take a count if a count was created and use that as the final. And if there's no count, it's just going to do the group average. And if neither of those have a valid statistic, that's it. It's going to be null.
Okay.
Let me just show you the options here real quickly. You know, if, for example, instead of being null, you wanted to just pull forward last year's number, you could do that here. Or we talked about parent. If you had the parent-child stuff implemented, you could say, well, if I don't have a count, I want to use the parent statistic. You would do that. And last but not least, if you had a route average, so if you set up a route site group, what you could do, so like, let's say you wanted I-25 corridor, you know, from the Colorado border on up to be its own to create its own averages for that, as opposed to using a factor group average. You'd create a route HPMS site group, which we'll show you in a second, and then it would create an average for that group, and then it would apply that average to all sites on that route. Right?
Yep.
So, oops, I didn't actually mean to do that. So this is the way it is now, and the reason it's this way now is because that's what your Travis HPMS code did, basically. But you could override that by, you could create different rules based on different site groups. So, here's all your site groups. If you wanted to create a different rule set based on different site groups, so, I'm not sure of a use case off the top of my head, but if you had a geographic region where you wanted to use different rules than this, you would do that. But
Okay.
if you just want it to work like Travis, don't even think about this. This just works. This is the way Travis worked. So
Okay.
you don't have to play with it. If you ever wanted to play with it, you could. The same is true for all these little options here. This, I believe, is exactly the way Stratus worked for you. So, the enable traffic section functionality is what you need in order to get this route thing to show up and for all the route things to work. So keep that on always for you.
Okay.
And then use short terms for KNDs, that wasn't happening in Tratus, so that's not checked. Use continuous for these, use short term for these. These are all different things that can or cannot, or can be enabled or not. And so this, I believe I have all the checkboxes that match the Tratus logic. And I think that's it for options. Feel free to peruse it. It's not very well documented now. Hopefully just the description is enough documentation. But
yeah, it looks pretty self-explanatory.
Okay. You could also do the parent-child if you wanted to. This is a different UI. I'm sure you got your plate full with HPMS going, but that would be, if you ever want training on that, it's kind of a little different, and I can go into that maybe at a different time.
Okay.
So that's the options UI. And, I was trying to explain what these counts were. So in theory, you could have every single one of these columns filled out. You could have a route number, you could have a count number, you could have a parent number, and then the one that is by default created for final is the one that matches those rules we just talked about.
Right.
Okay, so since there wasn't a count, we used the group average. Let's talk about what you can do here. There's a couple things you can do. You can plug your statistic just like you can in the summary by double clicking it. And when you do this, the interface, the plug statistic looks a little bit different.
Okay. Yep.
Instead, you could just create a value like we did there when we did 10. But you could also say, instead of using what you used, which was the group average, use like last year's value of the 25. Like let's say, for example, you didn't want to change your HPMS precedence, but you wanted to all of a sudden use last year's value for everything that was out of range. I'm actually going to unclick, or sorry, I'm going to unfilter this because this is a lot more useful with multiple sites. Because why would you do that with one site? But let's say you hated all these numbers, and instead of using those, you select everything. I'm not going to do this because it'll take a while. And hit this plug values, which is the same as double clicking. Now you would say, I want to use last year's values, and hit save. And it would actually push all of these, like the 12, the 11, the 12, the 11, all those numbers over into this final column.
Okay.
And it would use those instead. So that's an easy way of just saying, oh, group average really sucks for this route, but last year looks reasonable. Instead of going through and changing the precedence and rerunning HPMS, which is what you'd have to do, you could just do what I just did.
Okay.
In this case, since it's the group average that is off, I mean, a 33 K factor is pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Probably something went wrong with the group. What you can do instead is go here to the group averages button, which is also in the summary screen. There's more buttons in the detail screen than there are in the summary screen.
Right.
Basically, these three buttons, the options, generate, export, and group average buttons, are in the summary. We add plug values and create notes in the detail section so that you can go through and either plug a bunch of values at once, or you can create notes. So where note is interesting is it describes it here. It will create notes on those, and you could select the no HPMS flag, which you've probably used the no ADT flag quite a bit. That's where you got
Right.
data is reasonable. I mean, it's correct, maybe it's a special count, but it's not something you want to use in your final statistics. This is sort of similar, except it will basically not change anything prior to HPMS, so you won't see it on your DVO3 report, but you will exclude that site, or these sites, because we have 3 in this case. You'll exclude these sites from consideration in this UI. So that's why you would create a note. It's like, well, the data's good, but the data's good. I don't want to mess with the data. I just don't want to include it here. That's where you would do that. Let's go to group averages. Actually, let's go back, find that 30 site, because I forgot. I've messed, it was in, let me go back to the summary, because I forgot what that is. I want the one that didn't have an ADT. I think it was
155. No, 155 had one. 151 doesn't.
151, okay.
Yep.
All right. So so it was 33, right? 51, yes, 33. So let's figure that out. Let's go to group averages, and this displays both your factor group averages, which is what we're looking at now, and your route averages, which none of those have probably been set up. So this screen is where you see each of your factor groups. So energy group, Gillette, etc. It'll show you the current value and the value from last year. And again, I wouldn't trust the values from last year necessarily, because I just ran it and then looked the other way. So this rural other looks like it's our culprit, I would guess.
Yep.
What you can do is you can just plug it. So double click again. Double click is always what brings up the plug UI. And I'm just going to change that to 15. Again, we're going to rerun HPMS, so everything we're doing right now is going to be blown away. So we're just going to change that to 15 and hit save. And again, just like in the other UI, it'll turn blue when it's been plugged. And you'll notice when we hit the run HPMS, there's actually 2 checkboxes. One asks if you want to overwrite group average plugs, which is what we just did, and one asks if you want to overwrite site plugs. So this is a group average plug, and then what we did before when we turned that to 10 was a site plug.
Right. Yep.
So all we've done right now is we've changed the group value. That has not been applied to the sites that are in that group. So what you have to do after you've gone through and you've changed all the group values that you want to change is actually hit this big blue button right here. That's what's actually going to move this 15 into that group column of the K factor and apply it and make it the final column. So let's click that now, and it warned you, blah, blah, blah. Okay. It does take a second because it has to go through the whole process. Because it has to, in addition to reapplying value, it has to rerun the QC for all the sites. Because potentially you could have entered a value that didn't have a QC. God, what? Oh,
it's no longer out of range.
Thank you. So anyway, it'll be blue now. I should have done this by route so that I had a smaller...
There it is. Yeah, it should be right there.
Oh,
yeah, it's there, 151, but it's not blue, but that's okay.
Okay, that, yeah, this is a weird, because this is the difference between, yeah, let me explain that. It's not blue for a reason, because we didn't actually plug this site. We changed the group average, which happened to be
Right.
plugged. So this is actually using it's using the normal default HPMS precedence rules. You didn't override those. So that's kind of where the plug comes in, is do you remember our precedent rules where if you had an
Yep.
account, then if you override that, so basically you're saying, okay, I want to do something different with that, that's what defines a plug. So either by directly plugging in a new number, that would be a plug, obviously, because that's neither account nor a group. Or if you were to like say, I want to use the group instead, that would be a plug. If you had a count but you didn't like the count, so you use the group average instead, that would be a plug, because you're overriding the default rules.
Right. Okay.
That's what I mean. So basically right now, the reason is if we go back up here and we run HPMS, if you preserve the plugged group average values but did not preserve the statistic values, you would actually still see a 15 for each of those sites, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So that's why that, and I'm glad you noticed that it wasn't blue, because that is an important distinction. All right, so that's the group average. So getting your groups in line is, I mean, since so many of the statistics are created from the group average, and we're just looking at K-factor, by the way, but each of these has its own set of things. You know, you got 6,600 sites using the factor group average, so that's pretty important to dial in. So now you see our K-factor out of range went down dramatically. Now we only have 134 K-factors out of range. So you could keep hitting, you know, whacking at that. Let's go back to the filtered view. You know, so these are 0, which is obviously out of range. Let me see here. Those are 0 because, oh, the count is 0. I'll have to look at that.
Some of those didn't get counted.
Okay. We had some strange, yeah. And it may be that in these cases you want to do what I talked about before, which is you just highlight the whole thing and use the group average instead, or maybe even last year's, rather than going one by one.
Yes.
Okay, let me think what else we need to cover. We covered creating notes, which will just exclude that. Basically, creating a note will make this column null.
Okay.
Because that's the count column. Group averages is where you probably need to spend a lot of your time. And you really don't have to mess with options. I just changed it to ML10 just to show you the route used. The similar, just what you'd expect. And you could do that. We're looking at K factors here, but you could do that at the summary level or any of these other levels. I discovered that I forgot a pretty major component of training. There's a function that we didn't go over that was actually kind of a central part of the new user interface, and somehow I managed to forget about it. So let me go over that now. Let's see. So at the bottom of I'm in the HPMS screen here. I mentioned that there's 3 buttons: the options, generate, export, group averages when you're in summary mode. And then when you go to K-factor or any of the detailed statistics, you actually end up with 5 buttons. So the same 3 that are there in summary mode, plus the ability to create notes on your sites and the ability to plug values. So those 2 buttons are added. Give me a second. I'm running this through the debugger, so everything is super slow. There we go. And there's actually a 6th button that will appear when you select a particular route. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to select route ML10. And this, by the way, is using a really old snapshot of your database, Chad, so you'll probably see statistics that are not even remotely correct, and just ignore that. So we're looking at ML10 sorted by beginning mile point, on down the line for K factors. There is now this button here called Fill Statistical Gaps. And the whole point of this button is to be able to kind of impute statistics for either missing statistics or statistics that you don't really have faith in. So this was part of the documentation, the original implementation plan. We'd have a button that would allow you to fill in the gaps along a route using other contextual information, so sites up and down the route. So let me go over that functionality now. There aren't actually any missing statistics here, but let me just do it anyway. It's the same idea for any of it. So first I'm going to select the set of mile points that I'm interested in. So I'm just going to select everything. If you only wanted to do a small segment of the section of the route, you could do that. So if it was like, you know, a route where there were like 3 distinct kind of traffic patterns, like a route spent some time in an urban area, and then on either side of that it was in a rural area, you might decide to do this 3 times instead of just once. But just for training, let me just do this once. So I selected all the routes, and I'm going to hit this Fill Statistical Gaps button. Okay. When you do that, the first thing it does is it has to analyze the route, or at least analyze the selected mile points, to try to figure out what it can do and what it can't do. And then it comes back into this user interface. So there's some text up here, but all the fun stuff is down here. What you're going to do is 2 things. You're going to select the sites that you want to use as input to the calculation of the other sites. So like this is a perfect example. Let's say, in this example, let's say we don't trust the group statistics that were on here. I don't even remember what they look like, but you know, maybe you don't like them. It looks like there's 7. If just looking in the background, we see a K factor of 17, then it jumps to 14, and you know, it looks like they're kind of all over the place. Yeah, you can see down here 17, 19, 22, 17, 29. Let's say you don't trust those. So we don't want to use the group average information at all. Let's just use the count information and then use that as output to override our group information. And this is how you would do that. If there were null sites here, that a 3rd row would show up with how many null sites there were, and that, by the way, would be selected as default for the output sites. But since we don't have that situation, that didn't happen. So in this case, we're going to say we want to use the 8 sites that have count data and apply that to the 39 sites that used group average data. Hopefully, I tried to explain it up here in the but that's the idea. Just pick the sites that you want to use as input, and then what you will use as output. And this is using, you know, some statistical magic to do like a best fit curve, where, you know, it tries to estimate missing data based on a curve using existing data. So let's go ahead and hit the Fill Gaps button here. And what we're going to expect to happen is we're going to see the 8 count sites just sort of stay the same. And then we're going to see these 39 group sites, get plugged with this curve information. And specifically, this will take a second. We're using an exponential curve. Let me see if I can get that up while that's thinking. New window. So best fit exponential. Yeah. So you can see examples of what I'm talking about here if you're curious. It's where you have a sparse data set and we just draw a line to extrapolate into missing data. Let me see if I can find an example. It's actually not exponential, it's polynomial, now that I'm thinking of it. Okay, just finished back there, but let me actually do this correctly. Polynomial. Nope, I didn't spell it right. But, like, here's an example. So, imagine these are your data points. It draws a curve trying to best approximate those data points. And so if you wanted to know what the number was here, you would just pick a line in that curve and that would be the number. So here's the results. And you could see kind of what I'm talking about. So the white, where it's not plugged, are the actual data, and it looks like those are continuous sites. So this was a k-factor of 16, 12, 14, 13, on down the line. And then this is the curve. So based on this curve, it estimates that the very first one is 15, 16, 16, 16, 16, 15. And then so it kind of just smooths it all out into one long continuous function. Down here it had, because we had data that was out of range, it computed statistics that were out of range too. Probably before you do this, we probably skipped step 1, which is make sure all the k-factors that you're using as input are good. I noticed this, but I ignored it. So there was a 22 continuous k-factor and there's a 29 continuous k-factor. The FHWA doesn't like anything over 20, so probably what you should have done is, what I should have done is, plug those to be 20 and then used it. And then you wouldn't have had these last outliers down here. So otherwise, I think that's it.